Welcome to another episode of The Communicative Leader. I'm your host, Dr. Leah. We often think of negotiation as something that happens in a boardroom or over a legal contract. We think of it as a high-stakes event. But what if we shifted that perspective? What if we acknowledge that every time you ask for a budget increase, you advocate for a team member, or even try to align your family on weekend plans, that you're actually negotiating? When we fail to see these moments for what they are, we leave influence and results on the table. Joining us today is a man recently named the best negotiation trainer in the U.S. for 2026. Derrick Chevalier is an Amazon #1 best-selling author, a certified mediator, and the architect of the Comprehensive Negotiating Strategies Universal Framework. He has worked with thousands of professionals to turn no into not yet and objections into opportunities. In today's episode, we're diving into why the traditional win-win model might be holding you back, how to master the objection flip, and how to use behavioral science to drive profit and progress directly to your bottom line. Let's dive in and have some fun. Hello and welcome to The Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million-Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On The Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Derrick, thank you for joining us today on The Communicative Leader. I'm so excited for our conversation. And one thing I was thinking when preparing for this, I love that you say that virtually every human interaction involves negotiation. And I could not agree more. For a leader who's listening, saying, I'm not in sales, I don't need this. What are they missing about the way power and influence actually work?
Such a great question, and thank you. I'm happy to be with you too. Well, two things. You ask about power and influence in terms of the way it works. Well, power and influence have the same objective, results. So power is really the apparatus that we choose to use, brute force or persuasion, or we can use position, right? Or influence. And many people don't understand that the definition of influence is the ability to have an impact on a person, place, or thing without the other party being aware of it. So that's the thing that almost everyone misses about influence because they is influence and persuasion as synonyms. So the leader who is using brute force is obviously missing everybody who doesn't respond to that, right? So the leader who understands that beyond sales, right, which is the transactional part, is only the tip of the iceberg in negotiation.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something I really love. I teach a persuasion and social influence undergrad course, and I kind of put on the students, I'm like, try and give me a profession that doesn't use this. And at first there are all these hands, and then they're like, oh, yep.
Yeah.
Because you're right. It's there, whether we're aware of it or not.
Yes. And here's the other thing, is you ask a couple of other questions about this, but the other thing is, like, we are either negotiating and selling, or we're being sold.
Yep.
So the difference is where the destination is, after all, and how we get there. So there's a lot that can be missed if we're not realizing that we're either having an impact or someone's having an impact on us. We're not required, right? Like, life is going to go on, and results and consequences are going to happen regardless of what we do.
Exactly. Yeah. And Derrick, now I want to ask you a little bit about your book. And I love this provocative title, Evolve or Be Slaughtered.
Right.
Love it. It stuck with me. And so I'm wondering, in 2026, as this fast-paced business climate, what have you seen? What are the biggest risks for these leaders who rely on old school, traditional 20th century negotiation tactics?
Right. So I want to say that I think those tactics are important to understand and to know about, because a lot of where we are in the evolved era in the
Mhm.
snuff era is really built on the shoulders of that, right? So that old school stuff is there, but
Yep.
we can't rely on it, and that's the operative word that you're asking. But the answer to your question, in my view, would be that the consequences are vulnerability and extinction, right? Because if we're relying on old school tactics or we're relying on our experience, we just did a poll that included over 1 million people, and we got 30 or 40,000 impressions about by asking,
Yeah.
can you achieve great negotiation skill and expertise through experience only? Well, about 56% of people said across many different
Mm.
sectors said, yeah, you can. You can achieve high level of skill and negotiation and expertise through experience. Well, that's a misnomer, right? Because your
Mhm.
experience is limited by that, but you're limited by your experience because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Exactly.
But you can create skill through experience. What you
Mhm.
cannot create is expertise, because expertise is the ability to compare and contrast elements from the same sort of sector, like a sommelier, right? Like taking
Mhm.
compares and contrasts red wine, white wine, whatever it is. So if you
Mhm.
only have experience, what are you comparing it to? So you're
Yep.
extremely vulnerable. And if you only have
Mhm.
old school knowledge, then you wouldn't even recognize, Henry Ford would certainly look at a Ferrari and go,
Mhm.
That's a pretty, big advancement on what I had
Yeah.
in mind." Right.
Yep.
He would certainly,
Yep.
but he would have no clue how to operate it
Mhm.
or how to build it, or the technology wasn't in. So it's the
Mhm.
same thing. You're either going to be vulnerable to somebody who has
Mhm.
more insight and skill and knowledge, and eventually you'll be taken out,
Yep.
just as, Ford is no longer the number one and only motor car company in the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking too, in your response, Derek, I'm thinking about, how people used to have these long tenures at organizations, and some do, but that's really not as routine anymore. And so someone who's been in one context, the same group or same industry for a long time, like you're saying, those skills might work really well in industry A.
Right.
But when that slows down, we want to be able to go to B, C, D, onward and upward.
Exactly. And there's a great example of this. I would ask you this question. What is the most prolific negotiation framework in the world, temporary framework in the world, would you say? Would it be, what comes to mind for you? The most prolific negotiating framework. What do you think?
Gosh, I'm not even sure. I think about principles of influence. That's what comes to mind because I'm
Sure.
more familiar with that than a
Yeah,
negotiating
right.
framework. I think of Robert Cialdini's work, but
Yep.
what are you drawing
Well,
from?
I would
What are you
say I
thinking?
would say that you can quantitatively prove that since
Mhm.
1970, the most prolific person in contemporary negotiation is
Mhm.
Dr. Chester Karras, because the first contemporary book that he wrote, The Negotiating Game, almost everything you're seeing in negotiation since then has been a known or unknown borrowing, if
Mhm.
not a rip off of what he's doing,
Yep.
of what he had to say. And it's so prolific that now when I saw somebody on an Instagram who was doing a master class that was
Mhm.
literally taken from the Keras workbook, and I contacted him and I said, I have a
Yeah.
problem with somebody just ripping
Yep.
somebody else's. And they went and they
Yep.
looked at it and they said the principles that he's using are part of the public domain.
Oof.
And his work, and yet to
Mhm.
this day, they are the
Mhm.
largest seminar factory on planet Earth,
Okay. Yeah.
the largest. And so
Wow.
they're the largest, and they're still but they're still teaching a lot of
Yep.
things that
Mm.
were in the negotiating. Now, how has the world
Yep.
changed between 1970 and 1920 or in 2026?
Yeah.
And so does some of it still work?
Yep.
Yeah, some of
Yep.
it still works,
Mhm.
but a lot of it, I mean, just by virtue of its life cycle, and yet people are paying a lot
Yeah.
of money and going to this, and they don't know. right? But
Yeah.
also, if they're doing transactional work, they're gonna be more
Mhm.
successful, but if you're doing beyond that, you're gonna have problems.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let's think about that, the beyond. So my next question, this is something that you talk about that I love, is the objection flip. And this really resonated with me because a lot of times I'll have students or colleagues say, gosh, they just shot down my idea. So you have this great idea, but someone immediately raises a concern. And then that objection either completely stalls or throws
Right.
in that monkey wrench. So I'm wondering, Derrick, what is the objection flip and how can we use it to keep a conversation moving without it getting really defensive?
Well, that's harder because we don't have control over whether or not somebody gets defensive.
Mhm.
What we do have control over is how we handle it, right? When
Yep.
they do.
Yeah.
But you asked such a great question. So the objection flip, and here you go. So the antidote to any objection, tactic or technique is the objection, the tactic or the technique or its opposite. That's a big one, isn't it?
Mm.
So
Mhm.
that's a
Yeah.
proprietary, evolved, or
Mhm.
snuffed area because think about this, and it's an interesting story where that came from. So the antidote to any objection, what does that mean?
Mhm.
That means that I show you my idea and you say,
Mhm.
that's nonsense. Well,
Mhm.
what is the simplest response to
Mhm.
that? If I, again, so the antidote to any challenge, right?
Yeah.
Or objection, tactic, or technique
Mhm.
is the tactic or technique. So you say no, what's the
Mhm.
antidote to that? What is it?
Yeah.
What is it? If I say no, what would you say?
Mhm.
Go ahead. What? No. What's the antidote?
Okay, Derrick, what do
No.
you
No,
recommend?
no, no, no. What? The antidote
Yeah.
to any objection, tactic or technique
Mhm.
is the tactic or technique. The
Okay, so
objection I
just
saying
responding it
is
is
no.
no.
So
Okay.
I say to you, you give me your idea and I say no.
Yep.
What's your
Yep.
response?
No.
Exactly. And where
No.
are
Yep.
we? I
Yep. Level. Yep.
just
Yep.
neutralized your
Mhm.
objection using
Yep.
the exact same.
I love that. Yeah.
Now, where
Mhm.
does it and why does it work? This is an
Mhm.
interesting quick story.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I hung out with these
Mhm.
guys that were
Mhm.
herpetologists, and we'd go
Mhm.
out finding these poisonous snakes. And believe me,
Yeah.
I'm no hero. These guys were real
Yeah.
herpetologists. I was kind of like, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
But while we were out there, it occurred to me one day, I
Mhm.
asked the question you just asked. I said, I wonder if there's any kind of how do you deal with any tactic or
Mhm.
objection? And I read all the books. It was nowhere.
Yeah.
It's in
Yep.
nowhere else will you find this except
Mhm.
in snuff. And then one day I
Mhm.
thought about it. I said, well, why were we collecting these snakes? Well, some of those snakes were pets because these guys are crazy. But
Mhm.
some of the snakes were used to create antidote.
Mm.
So when a
Yep.
person is bit by a rattlesnake,
Yep.
where do they get the antidote from? From the poison
Okay.
of the snake
Listen.
that bit you.
Yep.
And bang, it
Oh, I
hit me, and
love
I
that.
go, so it works in nature and
Mhm.
it works in
Yep.
negotiation. Now, or
Yep.
it's opposite. Now, watch this. So
Mhm.
I say, no. What's the opposite? Go ahead. I say no.
The opposite would be yes.
How about that? What did I just
Yeah.
do? No.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
you give me your idea and I say no. And what would you say?
Mhm.
You get
Then I would
yes.
say no. Oh,
No,
yes.
you
So you
can
do.
so it is the
Okay.
same or it's opposite.
Okay.
So
I
either
see.
way, either
Yep.
because when antidote doesn't take the
Yes.
poison out of
Yep.
your system,
Yep.
it neutralizes the
Yep.
impact of the poison on your system. So the first step is for me to neutralize, whereas
Yes.
I
Okay.
take your
Yep.
rejection of my idea to heart and I
Yep.
go, oh, well, oh, gee. And there's
Mhm.
all kind of ways to come. But wait a minute, my first objection is to stop the bleeding, is to
Yes.
stop the
Yep.
poison from entering my system. So you tell me no, and I go no. Now,
Yep.
first of all, you're going
That
to catch the other person completely
yeah.
off guard because
Yep.
they don't know what they're going to. What are you talking about? And we can go from there, right?
Mhm.
Or you say no, and I say, well, yeah, and go, well, No, yeah, well, where are we? We're
Yep.
in the exact same place
Yeah,
where we started, and
exactly.
then we can shift. So I love to talk about that one. Right.
Yeah, yeah, I love where it stems from, that idea of going out with your friends who are getting the snakes, and I was thinking my kids are very good at this because they
Yes.
will always meet a no with a no,
Yes.
but also I love how it disrupts. You're right, it is a perfect
Exactly.
disrupting strategy.
Exactly. And what
Yep,
you and then you can recalibrate that, but it stops you
exactly.
from being knocked off your center because someone
Yep,
rose an objection because an objection was raised. The first
yes.
in the Evolved book
Mhm,
talks about this and why it works in the
mhm.
psychology and all that of but it's
Yeah,
also technical that it
yep,
of course it works because what is the antidote to no? No, no.
yep,
Yes, yes, or I can go the
yep,
opposite. Or let's say you scream
yeah,
and say, "Well, hell no." Now I could come
yeah,
back and say, "Well, hell no." Or I
yeah,
could even say you could go, "Well, hell no." And then I could
yep,
go, "Now where are you?" Because
yep.
you screamed at me, and rather than coming
Mhm.
back at you, I went and maybe I said to you,
Yes.
"Well, you're
Yep.
incorrect." In the most
Mhm.
low key and now
Yes.
you're
Yep.
either gonna escalate, and more you
Yep.
escalate, the easier it is to take the wind out of your sails because the opposite,
Mhm.
you escalate and I let you go, eventually
Yep.
you run out of air, and now you feel like an idiot because you're yelling and screaming, and I
Exactly.
haven't moved my
Yeah.
position. So I'm
Yes.
maintain the power. So the first thing is to neutralize and then
Yep.
take the power and recalibrate. That's it.
Yeah. Yep. Brilliant. And I love what that does, exactly like you said, power and also for potentially changing counterproductive
Sure.
norms in a group. If we have a leader that's always shooting things down or a hard no, this is a way to continue a conversation to stop
It is,
that. And
and there are some other things
yeah.
in Evolve about dealing with that, but you've got some other questions
Yeah.
there too that we'll look
Yeah,
at.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So you
yeah,
just mentioned psychology, and I know that
right.
you often you incorporate psychology, behavioral science into your framework. And I'm wondering, what is one hidden psychological trigger that often causes negotiation to stall out, even before we get to the logistics, to the numbers?
Yes. Well, I believe that a lot of that comes from classic and old school negotiation training. So the first thing is that people focus on the deal and what they want
Mm-hmm.
rather than focusing on the people, and that'll come up again here. So the thing is they focus on what they know rather than on finding out what they don't know. And that is
Mm.
one of the biggest
Yeah.
difference between the Evolved and between classic, Karis, Harvard, and everybody else. So
Yeah.
all of them are gonna tell you something like,
Mm-hmm.
"Aim high." So I go into a negotiation and I'm
Mm-hmm.
aim high. Our question is, aim high according to who? So or I can go and I can say, well, I go in and say, "Well, I'm gonna go in my BATNA." So who came up with
Mm-hmm.
the BATNA? You did.
Mm-hmm.
Or I could say, "Well, don't split the difference." As Dr.
Yeah.
Karas did in 1970, or I could
Mm-hmm.
up that ante and say, "Well, never split the difference," as Chris Voss did in
Yeah.
2016. People
Yep.
think yeah,
Mhm.
never, don't, okay.
Yep.
But I could say any of those things, but who came up with if you say don't, if I taught you don't and never, then I've taught you to
Mhm.
fail in any instance where don't or never are the
Yeah.
only thing that are gonna get a deal with me.
Yeah.
Not right? So now you go into a negotiation and you say, "Well, I'm gonna aim high or I'm gonna come up with
Mhm.
my BATNA," then quantitatively
Mhm.
speaking, you're negotiating against yourself.
Yeah. Yep.
The
Yeah.
evolved negotiator, I'm not interested. I know
Yeah.
what I want or what I think or I know what I want, right? I know what I think I want based upon what I want. So I'm not gonna if I'm going to a negotiation, if my objective is to negotiate against myself, then follow classic strategy.
Yep.
Great. And
Mhm.
then you walk away, "Oh, that
Yep.
was fun." Well, I don't know,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna teach you
Uh-huh.
to go into a room and
Mhm.
big difference here is this. If we go into a negotiation, you have what you
Mhm.
want, I have what I want.
Mhm.
Neither of us get exactly what we want, but we get close.
Mhm.
99% of your listeners will walk away and call that
Mhm.
a win-win. You're gonna
Yep.
say, "Wow, I wanted X,
Yep.
but I didn't get that, but I almost got
Mm.
it." And
Yep.
you didn't wanted Y, and you didn't get it, but you almost got it.
Yeah.
So that was, wow, it's kind of a win-win. No, it's not.
Mhm.
It's actually a lose-lose. The
Lose
reason it
lose.
feels so good so often is that I say,
Mm.
well, because somebody probably got screwed, but
Mhm.
it's a
Yep.
family show. So I'm just saying
Yeah.
from that perspective is you have no clue
Mhm.
whether or not you had a good deal because all you're measuring your outcome is against a target you set.
Yep.
You set that
Yep.
target. So you go, I didn't get my target, but I almost got
Mhm.
it, and that's okay. Yeah, but
Yep.
what was the other person's? How far did you stretch that other person? Well, you don't have a clue.
Yep.
So in the evolve
Exactly.
approach, we're going to go in and base the negotiation and its outcome on how much of the outcome is based on information or data we didn't know when we went in.
Mhm.
Because when we get
Yep.
that new data and new
Mhm.
insight, it's going to impact what we thought we knew and what we thought we wanted. And now we're going to be looking for a deal that
Yep.
didn't exist when we walked into the room, right?
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
the key, is to
Yep.
focus on finding out what you do not know
Mhm.
and moving beyond the idea of negotiating against yourself.
Yeah, it was so insightful, Derek, and I love, right at the beginning you talked about how we focus on what we know, and that makes sense because it's comfortable, it's a clear, unambiguous target. And I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you teach? Like, how do we start to unravel or uncover what we don't know?
Wow, that's such great. And in the whole section in the book, in the competitive negotiation area of the book,
Mhm.
there are 7 competitive rules
Okay.
in that.
Yeah.
So I'll share the first one with you. So you ask, well,
Perfect.
how do I find out what I don't
Mhm.
know? Okay, I'll tell you.
Mhm.
Watch this. Ask Iowa questions. Now, your response is, "Well, what is that?" And your listeners are
Mhm.
going, "What is that?" Now watch this real
Yeah.
quick. Doctor, what is an
Mhm.
open-ended question?
One that requires more than a yes or no response.
Okay, so everybody in your audience will answer something
Mhm.
close to that. Now think about that.
Mhm.
Everybody in the world teaches that concept. So
Mhm.
now your listener is in a negotiation and you said, "Well, how do I uncover what I don't know?" Well, the simple answer is
Mhm.
ask an open-ended question.
Okay.
So, okay,
Mhm.
but wait a minute. Now we're in a negotiation and now we remember it's like, oh, I need to find out what I
Mhm.
don't know. So I need to ask an open ended
Mhm.
question. This is what's happening in your brain. So now your brain goes, well, what is an open ended question? Well, the answer is an open ended question is a question that is not a yes or no question. Meanwhile, you're in a negotiation while that's
Mhm.
happening. Look what's happening to your brain. So, one of the evolved techniques that we came up with, right, is
Mhm.
ask Iowa questions. Iowa is an acronym for capital I,
Mhm.
U, U, H. It's phonetic.
Okay.
Iowa, Iowa. All right. So, now what does that mean? It means ask if, what, where, when, who, and
Mm.
how.
Yep.
Now you're in a
Yep.
negotiation and your brain goes,
Yep.
well, how do I find out what I don't know?
Yeah.
Great. Ask,
Yep.
choose one. Now, instead of
Mhm.
having your brain rattle around about the open-ended
Mhm.
question that I did, nope, all you're going to
Mhm.
remember is ask. That bald guy said, Iowa questions. What does that mean? I don't care if, what,
Yep.
where, when, how, who. That's what you ask.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
that starts, and so that's a perfect example of
Mhm.
where the evolved system or stuff system really says, we didn't reinvent that, but I can
Yep.
teach somebody how to execute an open-ended question in 5 minutes, whereas for the
Mhm.
last 200 years, people have been teaching people, well, it's a question that doesn't that doesn't help me when
Yeah.
I'm
Yep.
in a battle going, it's a question. And yet,
Yeah.
even under stress,
Yep.
and people go, well, which one should it doesn't matter.
Doesn't
What,
matter. Yep.
who,
Mhm.
what, if you'll figure it out
Mhm.
when and you go from there. So that's
Yep.
a perfect example of an evolved approach that works right now. Your people can come off this
Yeah. Yep.
podcast. right now, today, and use that. And that's a tidbit of what's in those rules, because there's a whole six others, but that's a great one to start with.
Yeah, that's so insightful too, because I think we go back to that idea of disrupting the
Yes,
expected exchange, which is really powerful when you're the one
right,
disrupting. And then
exactly.
two, when we stray from what is predicted. And I mean, again, this is in a very respectful way to do it. But those we're negotiating with, they're on their heels, right? They're
Right,
trying
yes,
to figure out what can I share, what can I not share.
yeah.
And so thinking about keeping our power.
Exactly. Now watch this. Say, "Oh, by the way,
Mhm.
when were you born?"
Yeah.
I
Wow,
was
that's what you
asking you,
ask
by the
people?
way, when were you born?
Me in the
Yeah.
80s.
In what?
In the
Now,
80s.
guess what? Thank you,
Yep.
because what we just
Mm.
did was a demonstration. Talk about
Mhm.
disruptive, right? I'm
Mhm.
listening, and then you say disruptive, and then I use an Iowa question, and what
Yeah.
happened to you? Like,
What?
what
Yeah.
was that? Now
Where are we
now let
going, Derrick?
now watch this one. What
Mhm.
did I just learn by asking you that disruptive question? Well, I asked you a question. Now, guess what? I don't know what the answer is, but do I know with
Mhm.
100% certainty that you know what the answer is?
Yes.
Now, guess what? So I know
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
whenever Dr. Leah does not want to answer a question,
Mhm.
she A, repeats the question, B, her eyes go up to the top of her head
Mhm.
and look off to her left, which tells me what part of your brain you are accessing. Now, what did I
Mhm.
just learn? Every time I ask you a question that you don't want to answer, you will repeat that same
Mhm.
psychological and behavioral pattern. So,
Mhm.
without even
Yeah.
telling me the answer to the question, I have insight about your behavioral construct. In other words, I can tell whenever you're lying to me without you even having a clue that it's just happened.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
That's
Love
how
it.
that works.
Yes, exactly. So let's move on. And this next question, this is something that I think so many people struggle with. It's this when you have this great idea, you have a vision that you want to enact, but then figuring out how do we actually convert this idea or vision into action. And so, Derrick, your framework, it helps a leader close that gap between the vision and getting literal buy-in, whether it's emotional or other resources like financial. So how do we get that? How do we navigate that with our
So that's a
stakeholders?
great question, but it also is, in my view, an oxymoron, right? Because when we're talking about the conversion gap of a leader who struggles to convert, now in the snuff framework, leadership is in part defined as the ability to achieve specific goals and objectives through the actions of others. So, if you are not converting your idea through the actions of others, you're kind of not a what? You could be a
Yeah.
dictator, but and dictator is a
Mhm.
form of leadership, but it's not leadership in the way that we're talking about. So that's the
Mhm.
first thing. So the first thing that we need to understand is that our being the evidence of our leadership is our ability to convert those ideas into results. That
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
how we prove who we are, right? Because
Mhm.
I had an idea, which is going to drive an outcome, and that's kind of my bailiwick, right, as a leader.
Yeah.
And now in order to get it done, I need these steps taken, and I can't do it myself, or if I am doing it myself, I'm not leading, right? Because that is what I'm capable of doing through the actions of others. So in part, what I have to do is that my objective is to negotiate people and
Mhm.
not the
Yep.
problems.
Yep.
You negotiate people
Yeah.
and not the
Yep.
problems, right?
Yep.
So or the challenges that get in my way, right? So when
Yes.
I'm
Yep.
talking about how do I convert, well, it depends on who's in the room. And one
Mhm.
of the things about the snuff framework is that it's going to inform you of how to take into consideration
Mhm.
all of the background and idiosyncrasies of
Okay.
the people that you need to convert, because you
Yep.
actually need a separate strategy for each one
Mhm.
of them. There isn't a blanket strategy. That's the
Yep.
nutshell. And so if you're trying to
Yep.
apply a blanket that's going to resolve the
Mhm.
objections of an entire board or a team,
Yeah.
well, you failed already unless
Yep.
they're
Yep.
all the same
Mhm.
person. right? So we
Yep,
need
exactly.
strategies that are tailored for the
Yep.
individuals we're interacting with. Yeah,
Yeah, and I was when you were responding, I was thinking about how, talking about negotiating people, not the problems, but a lot of times when we're not good with the people, we create more problems.
exactly.
Yeah.
So if we're not good with the people, that's
Mhm.
self-awareness. That's not a problem. There's a lot of
Yep.
brilliant people who aren't
Mhm.
good with other people. But as
Yep.
a leader, then you know that I'm not good with people. So I
Mhm.
find somebody who is to kind of,
Yes. Yep.
right, to fulfill that role. I communicate with
Mhm.
them. This is what Howard Hughes and a lot of
Yep.
genius
Yeah.
people do. They
Yep.
find a mouthpiece who can be
Yep.
that buffer, right? Somebody who can
Yeah.
communicate with them and yet take the message to the troops. So again, it is
Mhm.
understand, and even if you're in an organization with a leader and you talk and there's an imbalance in power, in other words, the leader you
Mhm.
recognize that doesn't have that capability, but you don't feel like
Mhm.
you have the ability to tell them that, there is a way to
Yeah.
tell them that. It's called a negotiation with an
Yep.
evolved approach. Yes.
Yep. Exactly. And so you just mentioned presence, and that's something we talk a lot about in this show. And so I'm wondering, how does a leader negotiate their own value and boundaries without getting that term difficult from either their peers, their subordinates, or from
Right.
a board?
Right. Well, I love that question. So I would say that in part, it is another bit of an acronym here. Put
Mhm.
people over titles, put purpose over people, put desired outcome over any challenge or outcome to reach success. So my value starts with my
Mhm.
ability to put people over their titles, because there are plenty of people with titles where there's a
Mhm.
mismatch, right? So
Yep.
people over title, but
Mhm.
purpose over people. Because if
Mhm.
my purpose is not greater than the individuals that I'm
Mhm.
leading or that I'm interacting with, then probably I should be doing something else, because the whole
Mhm.
reason the organization, the job title exists is to achieve the
Yeah.
purpose, not to hire people. It's to achieve the purpose. So people over title,
Mhm.
purpose over people, desired
Mhm.
outcome over any challenge or obstacle. And
Yeah.
everything else we're talking about are the tools to get that done. So you ask, well, how do
Okay.
I do
Yep.
that? And watch this one. The
Yeah.
first answer to almost any of these questions, well, how do I do that? You know what the answer to
Yeah.
that question is? Ask Iowa questions.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Well, how do I do that?
Mhm.
Well, ask how I might come back and say, who are you working with?
Mhm.
And then we
Mhm.
would begin to break down that
Yep.
question and identify and get to the action steps that are going to lead us in the direction to the solution that we're looking for. But you got to
Yep.
first recognize it and then execute and then come up with a plan and go forward. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That's a really great way where you're fact gathering, but not seen as adversarial, right?
Yes.
Not seen at, you're just sitting there trying to
Yeah.
understand so you have the
Yeah.
information.
Right. So now
Yeah.
here's the other thing that you just bring up, very point, and that
Mhm.
is this one. It's important to understand the difference between intent, right? So demeanor and intent. So what you just described when I said, well, I'm just sitting there, that's describing my demeanor. I'm low key, I'm laid back, my body language is relaxed, I'm not in your face, my voice is not elevated. I may even come down in the volume of my voice. I may speak more quietly. That's demeanor. Intent can't be seen.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
intent is implied. Now, if I was screaming or if I'm elevated, you might be backed off and I've frightened
Mhm.
you with my
Mhm.
demeanor. But I may have a demeanor that's aggressive, but my
Mhm.
intent is not. Well, it doesn't matter because I
Mhm.
lost you.
Yep.
So we need to
Yep.
know the difference between demeanor, and every individual we're talking about is going to require a demeanor that matches them rather than the
Mhm.
demeanor that right? So our demeanor is
Exactly.
the vehicle that we use to deliver our message, our
Yep.
intent.
Yeah, yeah, and that's
Right,
so important, and I think, piggybacking on and extending that idea of demeanor. So when we're in a meeting and there's high tension, maybe
right,
even adversarial, what
right.
is a specific tactic a leader can use to de-escalate the room and regain control of the narrative?
I love that. So if we go old school, like, let's
Mhm,
go old school, a lot of your
mhm.
listeners, maybe or not, but do you remember the film Glengarry Glen Ross by any chance? There was
No.
a
Yeah.
this was a film, it was a small film, but anyway, in that film, there Alec Baldwin plays, and he comes up with that. He's dealing with a sales group, and he comes out with it, and he goes, attention, interest, decision,
Mhm,
action. So
mm,
if things escalate and get out of,
mhm,
well, I have to get your attention, right?
mhm.
So
Yep,
I might say everyone in the room is fired.
mhm. Yep. We
What are
get
you supposed to
quiet
be?
quick.
What? Do I
Yeah.
have your attention? Are
Mhm.
you interested in finding out why you're fired?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, now what? So the old school was AIDA, attention, interest, decision, action. Now I said
Mm,
it was born out of sales, and this was old school 60s, 70s. So it doesn't
mhm,
work across the board. Almost everything in Evolve is we look for it to be universal, right?
mhm.
So we
Yep.
elevated that because it so that it works across the board. Now watch this, because I suddenly discovered you can get someone's attention, you can create interest, they can make a decision, and then go into action. But if
Mhm.
you get their interest and then they make a decision and take an action that are different than you want them to take, then you
Yep.
achieved AIDA, but you failed, right?
Yep.
So we
Yep.
elevated it and we found the missing ingredient. Here's the missing ingredient:
Yeah.
attention. Do I have your attention?
Mhm.
Interested? Are you interested?
Mhm.
Influence.
Mm.
So now I use the tool of influencing
Mhm.
your interest so that you make a
Yep.
decision that is consistent with the direction I
Mhm.
need you to go. Now you made that decision. Now you take an action that is consistent with the decision that I need you to go. And then I measure the result. So the evolved for the 21st century will work
Yeah.
online, on Zoom, attention, interest, influence, right?
Yep.
Decision, action, result. Now, how do I know that I achieved my objective? Because the result will be the ultimate reason that I got your attention in the first place.
Mhm.
Right? That's how I
Yeah,
would
I
quiz,
love that. Yeah.
because if the outcome at the end of the day, if the result doesn't match the
Mhm.
reason that I got your attention, then I failed. And so I go back at each of those steps and I can tell you where I failed. I got your attention, everybody
Yep.
was quiet. You were interested because you're looking right at me. Then I
Yeah.
influenced you. Well, maybe I lost you at that one. So
Mhm.
I didn't get it. So now I went on to decision and action. So I go back and I realize, well, wait a
Yep.
second. I had their attention. They were interested, but
Mhm.
then I did not influence them properly to
Yep.
make the right decision because they made the wrong decision. So I go back and I recalibrate influence. So it's a very many of the things that I love about Evolve is almost very
Mhm.
much of it is quantitative. You can argue about it, but you
Yep.
can't argue. 2 plus 2 is 4. If I got your attention to achieve a result, then how do I know I succeeded? The result matches the reason that I got, like 2 plus 2. Yeah, so that's a good.
Exactly.
I love that
Yeah.
tactic. I love that strategy.
Yep.
And we talk about that again more fully in the book as well.
Mhm. I was thinking too is that oh gosh, did I lose that they thought? Oh, no, no. Okay, so seeing the old school model you're talking about where it might on paper look like I am successful because you arrived at influence or arrived at this decision doesn't mean it was the one I as the leader wanted. I was
Yeah,
thinking about how the hits to my credibility as that
right,
titled leader then
right,
when then people can see me circling back trying to
right,
figure this out again.
right, right. So,
You've got some
that's the
leeway, but not endless.
right. Well, here's the thing. Most people are not thinking about the idea of connecting it
Mhm,
from a quantitative standpoint.
mhm,
Like, so if I come back and I say, I can do what you said, I
mhm.
can get their attention, they
Yep.
can be interested, they made a decision. But was that why you were doing it? No.
No.
If all a
Yep.
person did is you can say, yes, I successfully got Dr. Leah to make a decision. But then she took
Yep.
an action that was completely different from what
Yep.
then I failed. Then I was either not persuasive or I was not influential, because the credibility that I have as a negotiator, as a leader, is
Mhm.
built upon the results that are achieved at the end of the day. The end of the day, because if I don't achieve the result, then nothing else that I did really matters. And not that it may have some residual value, but ultimately, if I didn't achieve the result, then I
Mhm.
failed. I may not be a failure, but
Exactly.
I failed
Yeah.
in that objective. Right.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So let's continue with this
Yeah.
idea of results. And that's
Yeah.
something I love. You mentioned that resolving personnel and leadership challenges, it really helps to drive profit. And so, Derek, I'm wondering, in your experience, how does closing those internal conflicts faster directly impact a team's decision velocity?
Absolutely, because listen, conflict clouds clarity, and a lack of clarity curtails outcome and results. So it's a direct connection to the bottom line, because a lack of clarity creates inertia. When I'm not clear, if you're driving in the fog, if it's clear out and you're driving down the road, you can drive at 100 miles an hour, assuming there's no
Hmm.
policeman. But you
Yep.
can drive 100 kilometers an hour and feel like you're
Hmm.
going 100, right? Now,
Yep.
add fog into that. Now drive at
Mm.
100, your risk of
Yep.
dying is much higher and of hitting
Yep.
something or hurting somebody else. So it's a direct quantitative reality that when there is a lack of clarity, there is inertia. And when there's
Hmm.
inertia, everything slows down and we lose the focus on our objectives. And then people
Mm.
begin protecting
Yep.
themselves. So we go from a group focus on the achievement or attainment of an outcome to now I'm unclear about what I'm supposed to do or where I fit. So the first thing I do
Yeah.
now is turn internal and figure out, well, then how do I protect myself? So we're now no
Hmm.
longer a cohesive group looking to solve or resolve an issue or
Yep.
achieve an outcome. We're a bunch of individuals working under the
Hmm.
same roof. That's
Yep.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I love that the metaphor bringing in the fog, right? That's such a powerful visual to consider how we make those. And you brought up personal protection too, right?
sure.
Where we recognize I need to take
Is
care of
it
myself.
Yes. Well
Mm-hmm.
well, what else are you going to
Mm-hmm.
do? I mean, if we're
Exactly.
unclear about where we fit and what we're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do, well, by definition, we're gonna slow down, and that's
Yep.
going now you've got a group of people who are all slowed down, who are not certain about what they're supposed
Yeah.
to do or where they fit. Well, if I'm not certain about where I fit in the group, then what choice do I have other than to think about, well, how do I protect myself while we're figuring it out? So conflict clouds clarity, and clarity creates
Mm-hmm.
inertia.
Yep.
Therefore, what I have to do is resolve the conflict, because the cost of the conflict is greater than
Yep.
than the benefit of removing it. Whatever it costs me
Exactly.
to clear out that
Yep.
conflict, because
Yep.
in inertia, all that's an end unto itself. So I know that I'm going nowhere until I do it. So whatever it costs me to
Mm-hmm.
clear the conflict is going to pale in comparison to
Yep.
what happens if I don't, right? For the
Exactly.
organization and the people within it. So there's a direct and measurable cost in
Yep.
allowing conflict to drive the ship.
Yeah. 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 So, Derek, are my two final questions for you. These are intertwined. This is the way we end all episodes of The Communicative Leader. So, the first part is, what is the pragmatic leadership or communication tip, challenge, or advice for our titled leaders? And then the second part is, what do you want to leave those employees across all ranks, all industries with?
Sure. So I think we kind of will go back and touch on that acronym of a title advice for a titled leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it goes back to put your people over your title and everybody else's. Right? Because
Yeah.
your title, depending on how the size of the organization and the size of your head and your brain and your
Yeah.
ego often get into the way of the people and the
Yeah.
relationships that have to drive it. So
Yep.
that people over title,
Mhm.
right? And then put the
Yeah.
purpose for which we're working together over the people. And people can
Mhm.
accept and appreciate that in the sense that now we want to get to the moon. Our biggest payoff is we land on the
Mhm.
moon, right? Or whatever it
Yeah.
is. And then
Yep.
along with that, we got a bonus and a this and a that. So
Yeah.
that
Yep.
would be my biggest advice, which would be
Mhm.
to put people over title, purpose over people,
Mhm.
desired outcome over
Yeah.
challenge. And then that final question of advice to all employees is advice I think about every day. And that is another axiom out of my own life experience and that of my clients. Circumstances do not dictate outcomes.
Mhm.
Circumstances do not dictate outcomes. So, whatever your title, whatever your position, wherever you are in your life, both in work and outside of work, whatever set of challenges that you're dealing with, whatever
Mhm.
obstacles are in the way, think about this. And this is not just an axiom, it's a statement of fact.
Mhm.
Circumstances do not dictate outcomes. How do I know that? Because if they did, everyone born poor without
Mhm.
opportunity or education would die poor
Mhm.
without opportunity
Yep.
and education, or everyone who
Mhm.
comes out of a certain set of circumstances
Mhm.
that you're in would have the same outcome, and they don't
Yeah.
because
Yep.
circumstances do
Mm.
not dictate outcomes. People do. So the advice to
Yep.
employees is you do. You're
Mhm.
responsible for understanding how to control and or manipulate, for better word, how to negotiate the circumstances, right?
Yep.
Right, and in
Yep.
order to drive the outcome and over
Mhm.
and above to achieve the outcome that other people aren't getting. And so I would say that you need tools to do that.
Mhm.
Wherever we are, if we're going
Mhm.
to stand and assume that we can navigate all the issues and problems that we have with the tools that we have, if we could do that, we would already be doing it. So the
Yep.
recognition that what is missing is we've got a box full of experience and tools in our life, but we don't even
Yep.
know what's not in that toolbox.
Mhm.
Right,
Yep.
and we clearly there's not enough, and I'll do one anecdote. I was in and I love the Viking history and all that. So
Mhm.
I was in just in that part of the world over the summer and in Copenhagen and all throughout that area.
Mhm.
And I went to the Viking Museum, right? So
Mhm.
at the Viking Museum, they're actually building Viking ships with the same tools that they
Wow.
use to build them, and they
Yeah.
have several of the ships that are sunken out there. So I go in the
Okay.
workshop and I see an entire wall full of dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of very
Mhm.
specific hand tools that
Yep.
are used to take a log and create a Viking ship. And I thought to myself, it must have been over hundreds of years as different logs would come in
Yeah.
that a master
Mhm.
craftsman would go, you know what?
Mhm.
This tools that we have
Yep.
for this particular log, we
Mm.
don't have a tool that's going to navigate or solve that problem. And they
Yep.
created another tool. So I
Mhm.
thought to myself, I have no idea what most of those tools
Mhm.
are. I wouldn't have even known that they existed except that I'm here. I
Mhm.
certainly didn't know that I was missing them in my
Mhm.
box. So the idea is understand that you're not going to see the tools in a box where they don't exist. So you have to
Yep.
make a commitment to it. And that's the great thing about your podcast, because it's a place to identify tools that you didn't know you didn't have. And then what
Yeah.
happens is after that is those circumstances that do not dictate outcomes require that you take an action
Yep.
based upon what you learn.
Yeah. Thank you, Derrick. One thing I want to raise up, and this has been a continued theme, is I love how you are learning everywhere you go. right? From your friends with the snakes to the
Yeah,
Viking Museum. But it's so powerful because I
yeah,
think so many people think I can only learn at work or I can only learn in school or I only take this class. And that's not the case. And you're making, I think in some ways it's even more powerful because it's your brain processing these things
right,
behind the scene and you have
right,
those aha moments. So
right.
thank you
Yeah,
also for raising that up for us.
thank you, so that's great. You know what? I remember by asking the question,
Mhm.
I remember asking the day I asked the question, I thought, I wonder if there is some way or some tool that will neutralize any objection. So, and
Yep.
then the idea of looking and reading and
Yeah.
researching and, spending
Yep.
time online in the library because I like to hold books
Mhm.
and go,
Yep.
I'm sure you do too. There's kind of
Mhm.
like,
Oh, I
wow,
do. I
you
love
get
books.
lost and yeah,
Yep.
and well, just I mean, that's
Yep.
what and then suddenly I remember I went, "Oh my god,
Yep.
Venom! Where are you coming up with that one?" So
Exactly.
you never know
Mhm.
while looking at a
Yep.
sunset or a cloud or like this. And let me say this one last. One of the most important things that I know that in your spirit you would follow this, but one of the axioms that drives me in life, and that's part of evolved as well. I learned from Bruce Lee, the martial
Mhm.
arts.
Mhm.
So I love what he said, "Be like water. You put water in a cup,
Mhm.
it becomes the cup."
Yep.
Right, and so
Yeah.
everything that we learn allows us to fit in more cups and to be
Yep.
more like water in different
Mhm.
circumstances, and so there's a joy about living and exploration that makes us alive if we want to, whereas otherwise, if we just look around,
Exactly.
we can be discouraged by what we see in front of us. Does not have to be that
Yep.
way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Such a powerful reminder. Well, Derek, this has been an absolute joy. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot. I have so many notes. I've been taking notes our whole conversation. So I know you're going to leave our listeners with so many helpful tools. So thank you for sharing your time.
Thank you. It's a privilege. You're wonderful. I mean, people are listening to your podcast. You now have a new fan, so I'm definitely following and listening to see who else you have. But I think it all comes from you and your love of what you're doing and your own curiosity and joy and wisdom too. So thank you for the privilege of sharing with me, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk again.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on The Communicative Leader.